I'm DeeAnn Tran. I'm the librarian for teacher ed and special ed, as well as for the iSchool. And I've had the pleasure of mentoring Lindsay Cutler. She's a senior and she's majoring in psychology. And she grew up here in San Jose, and she's very passionate about issues in homelessness. And I think you'll find it evident in her presentation titled COVID-19 and the Housing Crisis at Interdisciplinary Analysis. Here's Lindsay.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Lindsay. It's nice to have you all here with me today. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to get ready to share my screen in a sec. All right. Can everyone see my screen okay? Awesome. All right, so welcome to my presentation. Today I'm going to be talking about the impacts COVID-19 has had on the housing crisis from an interdisciplinary perspective. And I'm going to be analyzing specifically major cities that have an agglomeration in tech. So I was born and raised here in San Jose. And from what I remember, homelessness was way less prevalent just from walking around being here. Years later, as I'm graduating from San Jose State, I noticed that wealth inequality has grown in a remarkable amount, and homelessness continues to proliferate. So I wanted to know, what is specifically responsible for the change in homelessness in my hometown? When I discuss this with people around me, I often hear people attributing this issue to the rapidly growing presence of tech companies in San Jose, specifically the fact that they hire tech workers from other regions and they need more housing, and they are paying them a salary that allows them to afford high amounts of rent. So I wanted to see if there was literature following up on this, and I wanted to evaluate what they had to say and add my own input. So to do this, I conducted a mixed methods meta-analysis. I was hoping to formulate a model to kind of explain the interactions behind what's going on here. It's really difficult to say that one thing is causing another in this situation, because to do that, you have to do an experiment and you have to have a control. And regarding the ethics of homelessness, it's very, very tricky. So it's a lot easier to kind of examine things and gather the data and look more at what things line up. So I selected 5 cities to analyze based on their rank of highest tech employment concentration. So that includes San Jose, San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle, and Boston. So what I did was look at quantitative data, and I coded the quantitative data into categories related to homelessness, income, employment, and housing, and I connected this to more of the broader assertions that I read in more of the qualitative literature. So in order to further sort these findings, I used a grounded theory approach informed by Strauss and Corbin's writings. They described this approach to inquiry as sorting things into defining a core phenomenon. So I kind of find the central category, and then I break it down. I find these correlative factors, these things that influence it. There are also strategies which are related to the central phenomenon, and these are the actions that are taken in response to the consequence, which is the outcome of the strategies. The interfering factors are also analyzed, and these are narrow or broad conditions that can potentially influence the strategies implemented to tackle the problem. So using this outline, I was hoping to formulate a theory to generate testable hypotheses for future researchers. So to get started, on a single night in 2019, over 500,000 people were experiencing homelessness in the United States. This graphic here is going to give you more of a breakdown of how many people are sheltered versus unsheltered. I was gathering my data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and my report was analyzed from the annual homeless assessment report. So One of the key findings of this report is the regional concentration of homelessness. The national homelessness rate has increased overall, but this is primarily attributed to outliers in coastal regions of the nation. So I annotated this graphic from the report to include all the cities that I analyzed. And I think it's very interesting that every single city that I analyzed lies within a state where over 50 people are homeless for every 10,000 people in the general population. Okay, so to further break it down, in these coastal regions, a lot of the homelessness is occurring in majorly urban areas. So this graphic here will show you the proportion of major cities and other largely urban areas, which take up over half of the graph, as opposed to suburban and rural areas. Homelessness increased in the major cities and urban areas, but it declined in major suburban areas, and it remained relatively unchanged in the rural areas. So there's a lot of reasons why this is happening, and a huge influence on it is the local zoning laws. So 3 cities out of the 5 that I've chosen are located in California, and the housing markets in California are constrained by specific zoning laws and just like other social, political, economic factors that all interact. The economic analysts that I read told me that the supply in Californian cities are limited because the underlying structure of the region is fragmented governance. It has restrictive land use and taxation policies, and they tend to favor like high rising real estate. And these patterns have been long existing in California's history, and they've been accumulating over time. And it can be found in the judicial and legislative areas of the state. So not only does this happen, but it tends to favor homeowners over tenants, particularly in California coastal cities. And this is notable to consider because homeowners tend to be more wealthier than tenants and more likely to resist economic reasons to become homeless. Okay, so this is further described by more economic literature that I read. So a ratio of high housing growth to low housing quantity growth is described as a low elasticity of supply. So as I was previously describing in California, the elasticity of the housing market is severely impacted by the local zoning laws. So in Seattle, another city that I included in this analysis, there is the housing unit supply has grown at twice the rate that it has grown in the Bay Area, which includes San Francisco and San Jose. It grew at a rate of 1.4%, while the Bay Area grew at a rate of 0.7%. So this graphic here is a further visualization of elasticity. The lack of housing supply, in addition to high property values, just further impacts this, and it's demonstrated by this diagonal line here on the graph, highlighted in red. Those who fall below the line in area D are more affordable and have a better supply, while those in region A have a very low supply and a very high value. And it's very interesting if you look closely. I know it's difficult to read, but you can see San Francisco is in region A, and it has been ever since 1960. San Jose used to be in region B in 1960 to 1980, but it has moved into region A over the years. And this is also noticeable in other cities I've analyzed, including Boston. So the constriction on housing elasticity has an impact on wealth inequality. When supply is low and demand is high, not everybody has a chance to receive housing. According to the papers that I read, lower income residents are often outbidded for housing by higher income residents, who are more likely to have recently moved in due to the job market. Because this consistent affordable housing is inelastic, renting or owning a home is not a feasible option for many on the lower end of the income distribution. So As noted in the previous graphic demonstrating housing elasticity, San Francisco has long been struggling with this issue, and city officials have commented on it as well. While they've seen a rapid growth of the tech sector and tech companies and the continual influx of new wealth and new residents filling jobs, there's also been a growing set of problems caused not only around housing affordability and gentrification, but wealth inequality and traffic congestion within the city and the region. So this can be related because I analyzed a report by cyberstates, and this was gathered by the Computing and Technology Industry Association. And they found that the median salary of a tech worker in each of these cities is significantly higher than the median wage of everyone else in the local area. So these disproportionately high paying jobs are centralizing in just a few regions of the country. So everyone who works in this sector and wants to make the salary has to move to this city. So this high rate of job concentration is described as agglomeration. So cities who experience high agglomeration, housing markets skew to favor the high salaries of these people who are able to afford the high rents and high property values, whether they're renting or owning. So data was gathered from Data USA ISO for this one. It is a database of public government records, and I found that the median property value of these cities are at least 1.5 times higher than the national median, and at the most it is 3.2 times higher than the national median. So this can be reflected in the tech workers growing and their population causing the housing markets to rise in price. So in addition to buying a home, renting a home is also costly. And as previously mentioned, zoning laws tend to financially favor homeowners over renters. So it's really critical to consider that this is highly unaffordable for a lot of people. Most renters are cost burdened, meaning that at least 30% of their income, but potentially more, is devoted to paying for their housing. Data for this was gathered from the Zillow Rent Index. So to reiterate, because consistent affordable housing rates are inelastic, renting and owning a home is not a feasible option for many on the lower end of the income distribution. So to further demonstrate cost burden, this graphic I took was gathered from the American Community Survey, and I annotated these arrows to demonstrate how homeowners tend to cluster mostly around the high income bracket, where those who rent tend to cluster mostly around the extremely low income bracket. However, their distribution is a little more flat. And this just kind of shows you how much more likely one population is able to fall into economic and housing instability. Now, to go further into the tech industry, this is the regional concentration of tech jobs over the past 15 years. This data was taken in 2017, so it's a little bit outdated, but unfortunately, the data I've looked at has only added on to these agglomerations since. In these cities, the blue dots specifically, the job rate of growth in the tech sector has increased significantly and outpaced the rest of the country. Every single red dot represents a decline in the tech sector. And in the cities where the blue dots are very large and dark, the dispersion between higher and lower income residents is significantly higher. And this is also demonstrated in the fact that the median salary of a tech worker is significantly higher than the national average. I just wanted to further reiterate this graphic from the beginning of my presentation. The regional concentration of homelessness aligns pretty closely with the agglomeration of tech industries. And I annotated the cities I was analyzing onto here because they also happen to line up where the tech jobs are growing. So I also just wanted to further reiterate that it is growing in California. The amount of homelessness that is grown in California is making the state an outlier in the nation. While homelessness in most states declined over the years, homelessness in California increased by 16%. And overall, the data I've looked at has shown me that this has been affected by the supply, as well as the extreme concentration of tech jobs driving up the values of property. So to look further into this, the beginning of my graphics demonstrated that about 2/3 of people are staying in shelters. However, this number is decreasing. The annual homelessness assessment report found that the large discrepancy in sheltered and unsheltered cases is also attributed to California. It's also attributed to California. So the 3% overall increase was also attributed to the fact that unsheltered individuals in California rose by 21% over the past year. So to look at this further, I examined the point in time count of shelter capacities in these 5 cities. This data was gathered from HUD Exchange, which publishes public government data from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The one thing that I found extremely critical about this was Boston. All the cities, except for Boston, are on the West Coast, which I've primarily been focusing on for this analysis. But Boston also has a high concentration of tech jobs. However, being on the East Coast, this concentration isn't as strong, and Boston's zoning laws and public priorities towards housing are a little different. They noted in their homelessness census that they put a lot of funding into community outreach and permanent supportive housing. Their unsheltered rate is the lowest street count they reported in over 30 years. Ooh, sorry about that title. I just wanted to explain a little bit more about what kind of shelters are available. So there's shelters for formerly homeless people and shelters for those who are currently homeless. For those who are formerly homeless, there's permanent supportive housing, which offers services for those with disabilities and chronic homelessness. There's other permanent housing, which doesn't require you to have a disability. Rapid rehousing is intended to just get you off the streets and into a roof. And then going further into shelters for those who are currently homeless, there's emergency shelter, which is like rapid rehousing, but is not intended to be permanent. There's also safe haven, which is for particularly vulnerable populations that might not trust authority. And then there's transitional housing, which provides people with up to 2 years of supportive services for specific needs. So going on to the impacts of coronavirus. Ever since this has impacted our country, a lot of people in the media have been talking about how the homelessness population is a really big concern. So the most frequent age of homelessness in major cities is between 50 and 55 years. And the most recent studies of coronavirus have found that the older populations have had a higher mortality rate. Not only this, but in the homelessness population, due to the environmental conditions that they have to face, they have accelerated physical decline. And the effects of aging emerge at an earlier chronological age. And so the coronavirus could heavily impact their health. Okay. So just going further, there's also coronavirus can be deadlier in those who have comorbidities with hypertension, diabetes, cardiac disease, chronic respiratory disease, and cancer. This is even further impacted on the West Coast where everyone is unsheltered. Those who are not on the streets or dealing with homelessness are also facing struggles due to coronavirus. The unemployment rate has increased drastically ever since businesses have begun shutting down. And in the first week of the quarantine, the filing for unemployment insurance increased by 139% in comparison to the previous week. And this data was gathered from the Department of Labor. And then, I'm sorry, I need to breathe. So the Department of Labor attributed the loss of these jobs to particular industries, so specifically the service industries in food, hospitality, accommodation, transportation, and warehouse jobs. And I just want to point out that all of these are physical jobs and not technological jobs. And in addition to this, some tech industries are actually hiring right now. Additionally, the National Multifamily Housing Council was tracking rent payment trends and found a dramatic decrease in rent payments for the month of April. Only 69% of renters were able to make their payments by April. This is down from 81% compared to the previous month. And just a year ago, 82% of people made their rent payments in April. So just to conclude on all of this, I agree with a lot of the literature that I've been analyzing. I feel like in addition to poverty and the housing market value, the interactions of tech job concentration, rising wages, rising property values all correlate to the core phenomenon of housing elasticity. When this ratio is tipped to extremes, the consequence of increasing prevalence rate in homelessness can be observed. This theory was formulated by my approach to inquiry and supported by my findings. So just to reflect, as a San Jose native, it was critical to my relationship with my hometown to look into this issue. I get the intuition that others who grew up here are blindsided by the rapid development of the housing crisis and are concerned for their future as well. I always knew that nostalgia is natural and watching my hometown develop is a part of growing up, but the observations I've made in my hometown are outside the norm. I wanted to know how I can be a better community member and feel confident that my actions are grounded in data. And I wanted to know how to better advocate for the most constructive approach towards this issue. I think formulating a descriptive model of the interactions helped us identify where we all stand in the middle of the cycle and how we relate to the others who are interconnected with us in the city. Having the opportunity to conduct this research was extremely empowering. I always had abstract perceptions of what interactions shape the city I live in. Conducting this research allowed me to gain clarity on unfamiliar terms, explain common misperceptions, and put my knowledge into a framework. I think it's more important that undergraduates have this opportunity, and doing this research was transformative in my career, my academics, and my values as a citizen. I was able to really feel like I own my academic career as opposed to merely participating in it. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. This concludes it.